Happy Labor Day. Today's Mind Espresso is about responsibility. Now, some years back, I did some work looking at some of the best school systems, private school systems, and trying to figure out what were the lessons that are distilled among many schools. And there were three things that we kept coming back to. Number one, integrity. Do you say what you mean what you say, follow through? The second is empathy, and not emotional empathy where you just drain yourself all the time, but cognitive empathy, meaning you can understand where people are coming from so that you can relate to them. But the third one was the most important, and it was personal responsibility. Responsibility for everything in your life, regardless of circumstances. And I'm going to bring in work by Jocko, Willink, who I introduced last week, as well as Mark Manson, who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Huh, which it's a great book. It's actually about values and responsibility. And William James, who was an early pioneer in psychology. I'm going to start with Jocko Willink, who said you can't be a great leader unless you own everything. His book, Extreme Ownership, is all about leaders owning everything around their situation, because if you don't own everything around your situation, why would people follow you? If circumstances were going to determine who wins and who loses, then who needs a leader? Now, take that same principle and turn it inward. If you make your life, your personal leadership about circumstances, why would you ever have self-confidence? Why would you ever start anything new? Why would you be action-oriented? Because if you believe the world happens to you, then you've disempowered yourself and you become a victim. Now let's bring in Mark Manson, who wrote a book about values, but really also about personal responsibility. And what he highlights is that regardless of what happened and why it happened and who did what, you're responsible. And he uses the example of someone leaving a baby on your porch. Now, you didn't cause that, right? Someone left a baby on your porch, but you're responsible, right? You're responsible for doing nothing. You're responsible for taking that baby in. You're responsible for finding it a home. It wasn't your choice, but you are responsible. If a dog poops in your yard, right, it wasn't your fault, but you still need to clean your yard. And he calls this the fault responsibility fallacy, where people believe that they're not responsible for things that they're not at fault at. And that is just disownership. It's disempowering, and it makes you a victim. And he highlights William James's journey. Now, William James was born in the 1800s. His brother was Henry James, a famous author, but William struggled throughout life. He had health issues, he had issues around work, he couldn't find himself, and he was suicidal. And he made a pact with himself. After reading some work about responsibility, he decided that he would make a willful choice to own responsibility for everything in his life. Stop blaming his health, stop blaming his brother, stop blaming circumstances. And he said, for 1 year, I'm going to commit to being responsible for everything in my life. And if after that 1 year, I am still not feeling empowered, I will take my own life. In that 1 year, he discovered the force of will. And this is what he writes about in the strongest term possible. He said, you need to shape your world through your will, and the very act of you owning that creates a better world. You have to believe that you can create something bigger, and it's that belief that then brings on happiness. He said, happiness is not something that happens to you. Happiness is a byproduct of you actively choosing. And he said, happiness may not come from action, but there is no happiness without action. Pessimism leads to a downward spiral. Optimism is what breathes life into will. And so his big change in life, and what allowed him to become a cornerstone of psychology, was understanding that willful choice, regardless of circumstances, extreme ownership, is the only way to gain agency in life and stop being a victim and move forward. So if there's one takeaway here, it's lead yourself by owning responsibility for your family, for your finances. Regardless of circumstances, own it, figure it out. And that is this week's Mind Espresso.